الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله اللهم علمنا ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وصلى الله على سيدنا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. So we start or we resume on page 56 of the book Al-Insan Wadat al-Life al-Ard, Man, Allah's Justice on Earth. And the Imam al-Buti is talking about a basic fundamental rule, which is realizing, because the last thing he quoted, the last thing we quoted in the last session was the advice of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu to Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas when he was going out to lead the Muslims at the Battle of Qadisiyah. And he said that you should be, that the soldiers in the army should be warier, or they should be more scared of or more afraid of their own souls, their own egos, their own anfus, like plural of nafs, than they should be of the enemy. So to a quick summary, the real key of it, he says that the Muslims are only given victory because of their enemies' disobedience to Allah. Because if they're disobeying Allah and we're disobeying Allah, then we're on equal footing, and then they have greater equipment, they have greater numbers, and then they're going to inevitably win. So we have to recognize that our victory comes from Allah. That's where it comes from. We have to be in a state of obedience and submission to Allah. So Imam al-Buti continues, and he says that Uthman ibn Ertugrul, this is the founder of the Ottoman Empire. I'm sure some of you are aware of that. There's currently there's series going on. They made a 5-season series by the life of Ertugrul. Now they're doing one about Uthman, or what they call Osman in Turkish. He's the founder of the Ottoman Empire. And Imam al-Buti has mentioned Uthman ibn Ertugrul, the founder of the Ottoman Empire. He's mentioned him in several of his books and videos, and said this is an example of a reviver of the religion, someone whose istiqamah, when his salah, his righteousness and his uprightness was like that of someone like Salah al-Din al-Ayyubi, like that of the earlier generations, people like Umar Abdulaziz, people who breathe new life into this religion. That's where someone like Uthman ibn Ertugrul is, like someone who is strikingly upright, strikingly righteous, strikingly pious. So he says here that Uthman, or Osman as they call him in Turkish, he understood this divine rule, this rule that Allah has set for this universe, and he gave it to his son being Orhan. That's not mentioned here, but that's who his son is. And he says, take this lesson from me. When I came to this land, I was as weak as an ant, and then Allah granted me these majestic blessings. Adhere to my way and follow my example. Strive to strengthen this Muhammadan religion, this religion of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to respect its people. And this is thus the obligation of kings on earth. So the whole statement is there, and I've put this on my blog if you want to read the whole thing as well. This whole statement, this footnote number 20, where Imam al-Buti quotes the statement of Uthman from a Turkish book that was translated into Arabic, and there's a lot of good advice here. I could read all of it, but I could summarize as well. But some really interesting points here is he says, do not employ people. So because again, Osman is being put in charge of a community that grows up to become an empire. And so some important points that come up here. He says, do not employ people who do not care about the religion, do not avoid major sins, are immersed in iniquity. So you have to have good people running things. And he said major sins. He said major sins, because minor sins are something that everyone does, right? Apart from the prophets and the angels, everyone's guilty of minor sins. And this is not a condition of wilayah. This is not a condition of being loved by Allah or loving Allah. And this is again mentioned in his book al-Hub fi al-Quran. You can have someone can be committing minor sins but still loving Allah, because the point is that you commit these sins, but then you repent and you make up in your relationship with Allah. And so that's one important thing. Avoid harmless innovations. Have compassion for men of the empire who devote their lives to serving it with honesty and sincerity. Right. So you honor the people who've helped you, who've been part of this effort to establish Islam in the land. You don't forget these people. You don't neglect these people. And then another major important point here is don't forget about the scholars. Make sure you have ulama around you. Right? Again, if we're going to establish Islam in the land and spread it out, we have to have ulama, we have to have madrasas, we have to have scholars, we have to have classes going on. The children have to be taught, the adults have to be taught. This has to be in place. And so he says, for example, if you hear there's an ulama in a nearby land, invite him to your land. Invite him to your land, and encourage him to come. And then he says, beware, beware, beware of being deceived by wealth and soldiers. So we're going to get onto that in the next and in the next page. It's an important point. Do not be deceived by wealth and soldiers, or by having a lot of land or a lot of territory, a lot of palaces, whatever it is. And he says, this religion is our objective and guidance is our way. Take this lesson from me. When I came to this land, I was as weak as an ant, and then Allah granted me these majestic blessings. Adhere to my way, follow my example, strive to strengthen this Muhammadan religion, and respect its people along with the rest of your obedient subjects. Do not spend more than is necessary from the finances of the empire. So don't waste resources, don't waste money. Do not withhold your sincere advice from your successors, and relieve your subjects from oppression. Right? So carry on giving this advice. Now, this point about do not be deceived by wealth and soldiers. The context is what this is tied into is what Imam al-Buti says on the top of page 57, going into page 58. He says, despite all of this, you should know that the current state of affairs should not be deemed a victory or superiority for the unbelievers over the Muslims. Rather, the truth is that they've been put in charge or given authority. So here's how this all ties in. Everyone, we have to understand this, everyone, every individual, every organization, every nation, every country, whatever it is, starts at a position of weakness. Everyone starts at a position of weakness. And then through efforts, right? And we mentioned this before, through having proper adab, through being committed to akhlaq, right? And this can happen even if people are not Muslims, because this has happened with several empires throughout history. Look, say the Roman Empire, the British Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So many empires have risen up simply by being dedicated to adab and akhlaq, and not necessarily religion. But the point is this: these nations start from something, or start from nothing, and then through their efforts they reach a peak. Okay, they reach a summit where they have power and they have authority and they have wealth over the land. But then what happens is that their wealth and their power and their authority, it inebriates them, it blinds them, it sends them into a drunken stupor, and they forget where they came from. Right? That's an old expression we have in English. Don't forget where you come from. Right? Don't forget the state that you were in before. So what happens is they start believing that the position they are in is simply there because they are who they are. They believe that they have some inherent or intrinsic right to this. Like, yeah, we're powerful because we've always been that way. It's just how it's always been. It's how it always will be. We're powerful because we're Americans, or we're powerful because we're this big football club, or we're powerful because such and such reason. And they forget where they come from. And so when that kind of stupor sets in, this idea that we're just here because of this is the normal state of things, we're inherently deserved to be here, that's when everything falls down. You see, and this is why I think I mentioned this last time. Sorry, clear my throat. Imam al-Buti has a whole series called it's on TV, it's on YouTube, called the Qadam al-Dul, like how do nations advance? And he talks to this point where you see the Arabs in particular, the Arabs were in a state of Jahiliyyah. They were illiterate, they were at war with each other, they had horrible customs amongst themselves. But when Islam came along, Islam gave them adab, gave them etiquettes, gave them manners, gave them morals, gave them knowledge, and then they ascended the ladder. They climbed the ladder. Right? That's what they did. So Islam was the ladder that brought them up. And then when they, or if they both, when and if they forget that ladder, if they forget how they got there, They say, no, well, it's now the 21st century and we don't need Islam anymore and we'll just carry on. It's like, no, 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 no. Now you're going to fall back down to what you were in before. You're just going to fall back down into Jahiliyyah. If you forget all the efforts you made you great, that got you that level, if you forget all that stuff, then you go back to where you were, right? And this is a theme that you can see in so many different levels, right? I mean, you can see this in movies. They put this in stuff like it's in Rocky movies, right? There's what's it? The Rocky movie where he fights Clubber Lane, and Clubber Lane beats him. Why? Because Rocky thinks, well, of course I'm going to win. I'm Rocky. I've won so many fights. I'm a champion fighter. Of course I'm going to win. But he loses. Why? Because he's lost the hunger. He just becomes complacent and thinks, yeah, I am where I am because of who I am, not because of what I've been doing. So this is a really, really key thing here. So the way this ties in, so we have to remember this because we're living in a very interesting time, geopolitically, because again, Imam al-Buti passed away 10 years ago. It was in Jamad al-Ula, 1434, right? We're now in Jamad al-Akhirah. He passed away 10 years ago. And he's talking about the West in particular. He's talking about how the West, you should never ever think that the West, that is an example, the Americans or the Europeans, we should never ever think that they are in their position because they have something that we don't, that they are better than us. They have something inherently better about them, and that's why they're in the position that they're in. It's like, no, rather what it is, it's not victory, it's not superiority. Rather, it's just they're being put in charge and given authority, right? And as I mentioned last time, they're there because the Muslims have abdicated their authority. The Muslims have sort of stepped away, and then someone has to run things. Someone has to run things. And I gave this example for, if you have if a father passes away and he leaves behind a young family, and the eldest son is 12 years old, he has to step up. He has to step up and become the man of the house. He's not in that position because he is the best person for the job. He steps up and does the job because no one else is doing it. That's the way we have to see this. So why I mentioned this thing about the West and the current situation is, again, what's happening now with the West is, especially look at the Americans and the Europeans, they're going through that same process where they've started assuming, they've gone to a position where they then assume that, well, because we're in a position of authority and everyone speaks English and everyone follows our rules and everyone uses our banking system and everyone uses this and that we do, we're just here because we're supposed to be here and it's the norm of things. And what's happened is, you look at the past couple of years, people started doing their own thing, right? Like you look at major countries like, say, like Russia or China or India. They're doing their own thing. They're moving away. Afghanistan, they're just doing their own thing. They don't really care what the West has to say anymore. And the West are caught up in that hubris, right? I watched an interesting interview a few months back now of the Indian foreign minister, and he was asked about the Ukraine-Russia thing, and he said, it's not relevant to us as Indians. It's a European matter. I'm like, huh? And he said, no. He said, no. You Europeans have to get out of this. You have to stop thinking that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are their problems, right? You have to stop thinking like that. He says, like India, we have our own problems in India. We have issues with our neighbors. We have issues. We have internal issues, and they are our problems. We don't expect the Europeans to help us. These are our problems, right? So when you Europeans have your issues, you solve them. Thank you, right? So this is all tying in. We're seeing this happening now. The point about this idea of superiority, assuming. Now, again, this is a very, very common thing of assuming that if someone beats you at something, if someone conquers you, if someone vanquishes you, there's this assumption that they have something over you, right? And Imam Ibn Khaldun, rahimahullah, in Muqaddimah, he talks about this. He said it is the nature of conquered peoples or vanquished peoples to assume that the conquered peoples, they have something over them, right? You make this assumption that it's them. There's something about them that makes them better than us. And so we have to do what they do. And then maybe we'll click on it and we'll become like them. We'll be powerful. And it's an assumption people make. So Ibn Khaldun talked about this, but he's not the only one. The Roman historian Tacitus, 2,000 years ago, when he talked about the English, where I am now, when he talked about the English, he says that is when we Romans, when we conquered the Anglo-Saxons, that's the people living in England at the time, when we conquered the Anglo-Saxons, they soon started speaking Latin, and they started wearing the toga, and they started eating Roman food, and they thought it was all part of their civilization. Little did they know it was all part of their enslavement. They're just imitating us, right? So we don't want to fall into this trap of just blind imitation and assuming that they're there because they have something that we don't, and therefore if we just imitate them, if we just wear their clothes or drink their drinks or eat their food, we'll be like them. Like, no, there's something deeper here going on. This is what Imam Ramadan is getting at. There's something deeper here going on. We have to look at Allah's divine rules and the way Allah structures the universe. And that's especially the case for Muslims. We and the Arabs in particular, but Muslims in general, we should never ever look at the Americans or it's the Chinese or the Russians, wherever it is, and think, okay, we just have to be like them, and that will lift us to some superpower status. No, we have to go back to what Allah has taught us and obey Allah. So Imam Buti goes on to say, so for a certain period of time, he's talking about the unbelievers. For a certain period of time, Allah might grant them the keys of rulership and the destinies of the universe, and will subjugate many of the laws of nature to them. Right? They're going to be powerful. They're going to be powerful people. They're going to be powerful people, but it only lasts long enough for them to become inebriated. Right? It only lasts long enough for them to think, oh yeah, well, this is amazing. We're here because we deserve to be here. We have something inherent about us. Right? We're the British. We'll always be here. Right? They start believing that, and they forget, and they become heedless of the abyss that they're on the verge of. Then they fall away. Right? They fall away. Now, so he says we should never, ever, ever think that this is superiority. This is not superiority. Allah just put them in charge for a period of time, long enough for them to become deluded by it, and then they will fall away like everyone else. And what we have to do is we have to go back to Allah. And that's why he says at the bottom of page 59, he says, these words are not for entertainment or bedtime stories, seeking to make the Muslims feel content with their situation by disparaging the conditions of their enemies. Okay, so this is a really, really important point. What he's getting at is the fact that we should never, if we start going to these stories, right, and we say, listen, the Americans or the British or the Russians or the Chinese, whoever they are, they're only in that position because of such and such reason. They don't really have power. We don't really have authority. We think, oh yeah, that's good. Okay, we can just sit back and relax, and we don't have to work on ourselves, right? Really, there should still be the wake-up call to us to say, no, we need to sort ourselves out and realize, okay, yes, these people are wicked. Yes, these people have evil ideas. Yes, these people, they're only there because Allah put them there, but they're still doing horrible things. We still need to get our act together and fix this, right? It's similar. It's similar to if you think back to school, right? Like if you when you were in school, did you ever have anyone in school that in your class that you were in competition with, right? That can happen. So you might have someone in your class that you're in competition with, and they get a better grade than you on the test, right? And you might, to make yourself feel better, say, yeah, but he got better in the test because he got help from his dad, right? Or, it was a physics exam. His dad actually is a physicist, so his dad helped him, right? Now, that might make you feel better. That might make you feel better. And you think, okay, he only won. He only beat me because of that little factor. But that doesn't change the fact that next time around, you still have to study hard, right? You can't say, oh, well, I have an excuse. No, we have to move on. We have to put the effort in. So don't let these things make you feel content. We have to keep striving. And that's why he says, when we consider the dominion of the Western world over them to be loftiness or victory. So on this on page 60, he says, whether we consider it loftiness or victory, or whether we consider it just Allah putting them in charge, the fact of the matter is they still do have that authority, and we have to do something about it. And that's why he finishes and he says, Allah does not oppress anyone. It is people who oppress themselves, The means of escaping this humiliation are clear and known to the one who truly wants to escape it from it and travel the path of might and victory. So what this is getting at is, again, we're trying to get out of the victim mentality, right? We don't want to have this idea of, well, oh, well, mashallah, right? The Americans are there, or the British are there. We don't want to have this kind of attitude. Just, what can we do, right? And start pointing the fingers and saying, the Israelis did this, the Jews did this. We put our finger at anyone, the Illuminati, right? We get into this frame of mind where we start blaming everyone else and saying, if it wasn't for them, we'd have our khilafah, we'd have it all back. Like no. Stop pointing the finger. We have to look internally at what we can do. Right? This again goes back to Surah Al-Ra'd, the 13th chapter, verse 11, which I think he actually quotes around here. Yeah, it's there in Uthman's text, what they quote from Uthman. Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Allah does not change what's in the people until they change what's in themselves. So that is a crucial thing, that the change starts with you. It might sound like a cliche, it might sound odd, but you have to be the change that you want to see, right? Be the change that you want to see in the world. That's what you have to be. You have to start changing things. Then Allah would, you have to take care of your internal enemies, like Imam Ghazali in the Ihya al-Muddin, in the bab of Tawheed and Tawakkul. He says that before you deal with the dog in the street, deal with the dog in your house. Before you deal with the dog in the house, deal with the dog in your heart. When you start dealing with your internal enemies, the external enemies are easy to defeat. So, and that starts at the individual level, right? You can't hope, for example, as a Muslim, you cannot hope to solve problems out there in the world, whether it's problems in your work or your job or your community, or if you're even thinking like broader, like larger political problems. You can't start thinking about those problems or even hope to solve those problems if, for example, you're not getting up in the morning and praying Fajr, right? There are some really basic things, really basic things like that, right? So if you're not getting up in the morning and praying Fajr and reading Surah Yasin and getting your day off to a start and having a good routine, if you're not doing those things, then you can forget about this other stuff, right? Because there are really fundamental things in your life that you're not taking care of. So it's like you have to think of your relationship with Allah. That is the foundation stone of everything. That's like the foundation stone of a building, right? You can't be thinking about, what is my attic going to look like, when you haven't actually sorted out the foundation stones in your basement. This is like really fundamental stuff, and we have to believe that it's within our capacity. We can't be pointing fingers at other people and saying it's the Israelis, it's the Americans, and it's the Freemasons, and they're doing this to us. No. We have to look to ourselves. What can we change within ourselves? And that you actually find there is a lot. And when you know that, when you understand that there's actually a lot that you can change in your life, and then we as a community can change ourselves, that's actually empowering. That's empowering. You're actually giving yourself power. Instead of saying, well, what can I do? You're disempowering yourself. Now, the next thing, and I'll go on for, I've got 10 more minutes. So he talks here in the next chapter, he says, upon what basis does tribulation vary? Okay, so here he's talking about, so why do certain people have certain tests? Because everyone has different tests, okay? And not every test affects every person the same way. So that's why I mentioned in a previous session, I mentioned this video, this short clip by Imam Sha'arawi, where he's talking about, and it's a well-known story, but the man from China, the wise man from China with students, and he says, I want all of you to write down your tribulations on a piece of paper and put them on a table in the middle of the room, and then come back next week. And everyone comes back next week, and there's no names on the papers, and everyone has to find their paper, and then they have a chance to actually read each other's tribulations. And they're like, no, this isn't me. No, where are my tribulations? I want to see my tribulations, because people start realizing, whoa, if I was in your situation, no, I would not want to be dealing with what you're dealing with. I'm much happier with my tribulations. And then that's how you click in, you realize this is Allah's wisdom. Like, you have the tribulations that are set for you, right? Because Allah says, La yukallifu Allahu Nafsan illa wus'aha, right at the end of Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah doesn't burden a soul with more than it can bear. And Allah says again in Surah Al-Anbiya, وَنَبْلُوكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ وَالْخَيْرِ فِتْنَةً وَإِلَيْنَا تُرْجَعُونَ. We test you with both good and evil as a trial, and you will be returned to us. So he says you have to recognize that tribulation and trial, this is the common denominator. This does not mean that they are equal in how they affect the soul. Rather, there's a clear difference in the matter, and thus there must be reassurance that the distribution of these trials among people is just by knowing the law according to which they are distributed. So everything Allah does is just. And we have to understand that we are here, like this abode, this dunya is the dar of ibtila. It is the dar of trial and tribulation. This is its nature. And the Arabs have a saying, bil-adad tu'rafu al-ashya, right? By opposites, things are known, right? So you cannot appreciate health unless you know what sickness is. You cannot appreciate wealth unless you know what poverty is. You cannot appreciate heat unless you know what cold is, and vice versa. Right? You can't appreciate like having a cold water on a hot day unless you actually have a hot day. If you think about it, right? You can't appreciate food unless you know what hunger is. So he says, so he makes it clear. It says if everything were just the same, we would just be annoyed and bored. But here we are. We're in this abode. We're here to manifest our slavehood, and as we covered before, and it's also here in this chapter on page 62, the manifestation of slavehood is that you are grateful in times of ease and you are patient in times of hardship. And in order to know the difference between ease and hardship, you have to have both. This is what it comes down to. You have to have both. And this is how Allah distributes them. So Allah distributes them, and he says that when we talk about goodness and benefit and happiness, we have to start using the right terminology, understanding that when we talk something being good, it's good according to what Allah says. What Allah has declared good, what Allah has declared bad, right? What Allah has declared beneficial. So he says, so for example, the trial of poverty, he says on page 63, top of page 63, he says the trial of poverty can be what is needed to remedy a person's relationship with Allah the Exalted, while it can be a calamitous disease for others. So he goes on in this this chapter, and he mentions the ayah, عسى أن تكرهوا شيئا وهو خير لكم وعسى أن تحبوا شيئا وهو شر لكم والله يعلم وأنتم لا تعلمون. It may be that you hate something when it is good for you, and it may be that you love something when it is bad for you, and Allah knows and you do not know. So talking about poverty, and he gives the example, he says there can be someone who is wealthy and they have all the money that they need, and they're having a great life, but they are remote from Allah. They're remote from Allah, and therefore, and Allah gives this person poverty to snap that person out of it, to snap that person out and say, like, I'm your Lord, right? So this person is used to having all their needs met. This person is used to not having to struggle to pay for anything. If any need arises, if they need food, if they need to travel somewhere, if they need a scholarship, for whatever it is, they just pay for it. They're just not. It doesn't occur to them to think, "Oh, I'm in need." They've never experienced need, so Allah takes their wealth away, and they realize that their money can't help them, their friends can't help them, their contacts can't help them, their connections, whatever it is, can't help them. Then they turn to Allah, and that's the start of a beautiful relationship with their Lord. This is what happens to people like this. So, and he says, and this is what Allah is doing. Allah is the Rabb, right? He's the Lord, but he's also the nurturer, because Rabb is connected to Tarbiyah. Allah is the one nurturing you, and he's and he knows what you need. You don't know what you need. Allah knows what you need. Allah knows what is good for you. Allah knows what is best for you. So when you understand that Allah is putting you in a tribulation, because what he's trying to do is he's trying to wake you up out of your heedlessness and bring you back to him. Because there's always going to be a tribulation. You have to think, like, this tribulation is probably coming my way because I've been heedless and I haven't been in a relationship with Allah. And what happens, the beautiful thing that happens in this situation is when Allah takes you out of that situation where maybe you were very healthy and everything, life is going great, or you were very wealthy and these things are taken away from you, and Allah breaks you in a sense. Allah breaks you and humbles you before him. And then you turn to Allah and you beg Allah for help. You say, "Oh Allah, please, I need money for this. Oh Allah, I need my health restored." You start realizing this is where you might resort to fasting. You might resort to night prayers. These are all ways to bring closer to Allah. You might resort to Salat al-Hajjah, which is a beautiful dua for need, which is in the Adhkar of Imam Nawawi. It's in the Wasiyah of Imam Mahdi Lock. It's in the book of al-Adab.Car that we do with the Nawabooks. It's there as well, right? Salat al-Hajjah. You might do this, but then what might happen, and it's beautiful if it does happen, is that when you are making dua to Allah and you're asking Allah to lift that tribulation from you, you're asking Allah to lift this illness or to lift this poverty or to lift whatever hardship you're going through, you start realizing that what you really, really, really need is not the lifting of that tribulation. It's not the removal of that illness or the removal of that poverty. What you really, really, really need is what? It's Allah. That's what you really need. So once you've sort of rectified your relationship with Allah and you've got yourself into the habit of fasting and making dua to Allah, doing night prayers and making dua to Allah, praying Salat al-Hajjah and asking Allah for something, then you start realizing, wait a second, I can just continue doing this. This is beautiful. Whether my needs are met or not, I'm in this relationship with Allah. I'm fasting regularly. I'm doing extra prayers. I'm making all these du'as. This is beautiful. And then you just continue like that. You just continue like that. You see, this is why Imam al-Buti in a forthcoming book that we're working on, where he talks about depression and anxiety, he brings this point up. He says that if you are depressed, or you're suffering from depression and anxiety, and then you resort to the treatment that Allah has given you in the Quran, which is to be in a relationship with Allah, to be doing constant dhikr of Allah, to be improving your relationship with Allah. You have to understand, this remedy is not like some pharmaceutical remedy. It's not like Tylenol or aspirin or paracetamol, where you take it and then when you feel better, you stop taking it, like some normal prescription. It's like, no. Once you start taking the medicine that Allah has given you, the ibadah and the dhikr and the dua, and you're doing that constantly, regularly, you continue. You don't stop, because this is what Allah wants from you. So, so yes, and so this is what we are aiming to get at, and this is why, for example, like I'll finish on this point. So Imam al-Buti says, this is on page 66 to 67. He says, I have not forgotten, for as long as I have lived, a great man whose life Allah divided into two halves. In the first half, there were abundant blessings and perfect health. In the second half, he was afflicted with a chronic illness that he could not escape from. This illness brought him to Allah's doorstep and revived his heart by increasing the delight it felt in remembering its Lord, loving him and witnessing him. He would say to those around him, I testify, like I bear witness, I testify before you that I do not want my health to be restored if health will cause me to lose the sweetness of being near to Allah. And Imam al-Buti says, I felt that he said this from the depths of his heart, and he meant it with every fiber of his soul. So that's the greatest blessing of this life. That's the greatest blessing of this life is if you think about it, it's the fact that it's beautiful when you remember that you're Allah's slave, and it's even more beautiful when Allah reminds you. Allah does something when he reminds you that you're his slave, and then you have that sweetness. Because he says again in the same section, he says, think about people who live their whole lives and they never, ever, ever experience that sweetness of nearness to Allah. And this is what Allah is doing through these tribulations. And that's why this man says that. He says, if my health is going to take me away from Allah and I lose that sweetness of being near to him, then I don't want my health back. So, so I think I'll finish there, inshallah. And I think in the next session, we'll pick up from page 67. So I'll open the floor then for questions and answers and comments. Barakallahu feekum.